Welcome to another episode of Event Explorer. I'm your host, Daniel Roth. Today we're venturing into the elegant and intricate world of chamber music with our special guest, Michael Lawerence, Executive Director of the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival. In our discussion, we'll uncover the nuances that make chamber music so unique, featuring smaller ensembles that create a more intimate performance atmosphere, allowing for a deeper connection between the musicians and their audience. We'll also learn about the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival's pivotal role in expanding the audience for this art form, and how it has thrived under Michael's leadership, maintaining its vitality and relevance in the modern musical landscape. If you enjoy the stories behind unique events like BCMF, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe and leave a rating if you like what you hear. It helps more listeners find us and join in on the discovery of incredible events like this one from around the world. All right, let's dive in. All right, well, let's welcome Michael Lawerence, the Executive Director of the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival since 2014. Michael, it's great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Glad to have you. And I think this is a really cool festival. It's been going on for a while now and is really bringing something different or something that is a niche, that is a really cool niche that not everybody knows about. What is chamber music? What is different from chamber music than a symphonic music festival or an opera festival?
So chamber music is typically defined as music that's performed without a conductor from, say, 2 musicians all the way up to, 13, 14. It could be even larger. But historically, chamber music was performed in a chamber, a small space. And that goes back to the 17th, 18th century. A lot of classical music and classical music performers were performing for small audiences. And so they would have small groups get together to perform, and that covers things like piano trios, string quartets, quintets, mixed wind ensembles, etc. But that's a very basic sort of description.
But this is music, it seems like it's maybe aimed to be a little bit more accessible than a big symphonic orchestra or something that's a little bit more, the chamber would be at a house or at a smaller venue instead of a giant symphony where you've got 100-piece orchestra. This is something that's maybe a little more accessible for smaller audiences.
In a way. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's interesting because a lot of composers used the chamber music genre as a way to express their most intimate feelings or their most intimate music. And so sometimes, you think about like the late Beethoven string quartets, for example, they're incredibly complex and less accessible in a lot of ways than his big symphonies were, which were made for a large public. That's not to say that that's the way it is for all composers, but oftentimes, and especially as you move closer to today, chamber music is a space for people to explore ideas that are maybe not as mainstream in some ways, or are more extreme in some ways, so it's a really interesting place to be. The other thing about it I find really satisfying is the fact that all the musicians are equals in chamber music. So when you have a chamber music group get together, everyone has input. Everyone is making decisions about what they want to do with their part. It's usually just one person per part, so you don't have people, doubling like you're tripling or like a string section would be in a full orchestra. And so each individual member is really important and vital to the success of the group. And I also found, because I've worked in orchestras as well, with orchestra soloists, I'm sure probably there won't be too many of those listening to this podcast, hopefully, but you often find that the soloists it's really about them and their interpretation and what they're doing. And with chamber musicians, they are the nicest, most collaborative people that you'll come across. And that's been really interesting because I have been in both of these worlds.
A lot of people growing up to perform symphonic or classical music at a high level, they've been kind of, I would think it's a nice relief for them. They've been kind of subject to the composer or subject to the conductor or the first violin. And here it's the collaborative nature of it and maybe a little bit more cohesive as a group versus such a rigid structure. That must be pretty welcome for a performer as well.
Yeah, well, actually, in orchestras, and I've worked with a bunch of different orchestras over my career, the work that they find most satisfying often is when they get to break out and do chamber music for smaller events or education events or fundraising events, when they actually just get together, make their own decisions about what they're playing, how they play it, and perform it. So that there's actually a very funny, I don't know if it's funny, but there's a study that came out a long, long time ago that I read about probably 20 years ago, where they were rating job satisfaction. And at the top of the list was airline pilots, and then right under that were string quartet players or chamber musicians, okay? At the bottom of the list were orchestra musicians and prison wardens. They're right next to each other. So that gives you some sense of what the musicians also get out of this as well.
And it would be a draw for them that they're looking for this, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And for example, each summer, we often have the concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic and the principal cello of the New York Philharmonic, principal viola, have come out many times. The concertmaster of the Minnesota Orchestra comes out and performs with us almost every year. And so there's that mix of those musicians, as well as these musicians that just come from all over that do this for a living, or also just are soloists with other orchestras and have different kinds of projects.
A time to get out and maybe not experiment, but collaborate more and have maybe more of a social playing environment. A little bit dressed down, if to say.
Yeah.
You mentioned 17th, 18th century. Were there festivals back then? Are you aware of kind of the timeline of? I know your festival has been around for a little while, but not 200 years.
That's actually a really interesting question. I don't know the history of music festivals. I know that there were a lot of, typically what would happen in, say, 18th century, 19th century, you would have these nobles or people that had money would have their own musicians. They'd have court musicians, and then they would hire composers to come in and write for them. They would sometimes be in their employ, or they would sometimes travel. And so you have a lot of these events and concerts that are going on are happening in more of the upper classes. But then as you get into the 18th century, 19th century, you also have, with the advent of a printing press that allows for reproduction of all of these musical materials, a lot of this music is now being played at home. You don't have a radio, you don't have recordings. So the only way you're going to hear a piece again, say you go and hear it at a concert hall, or you go to some event and you hear a string quartet played, one of Haydn's quartets, and you think, God, I'd love to do that again. I'd love to hear that. Well, you could go out and buy the music, and then you could bring it home, and you could bring people together and play in the home. And with the rise of the middle class in the 19th century, you found a piano became sort of a social marker. And so those would come into the homes. And now people were learning how to play piano at home. And then they would do even reductions of orchestral music. So if Beethoven symphonies came out, they would do these reductions of it. So you could play those at the piano at home, and you could revisit them in a way that you probably wouldn't be able to, like you can today, either on a recording, or because there is so much activity, you can find some place to go and hear a concert and hear this music that people have come to love over these hundreds of years.
I'm really struck by that, and I know this is probably a big history lesson episode for people that tuned in to just hear about the details and goings on of a festival. But I just thought it was really interesting that your festival is almost a celebration of music at home. And that's what I meant kind of by accessibility, that
right,
you wouldn't have to travel to Vienna to see the one orchestra playing this one piece. All of a sudden, if you're in Birmingham, England, or Lyon, France, you might be able to have people over your house, hire a few musicians, and play the music this way, rather than having to go either to a church or a big symphonic hall and pay a ticket and maybe you get that once a year. Now you may be getting music on the weekends or music once a month.
Right. It's really funny because the word accessibility is such a trigger word in our field. In classical music, because accessibility, from the way that we usually talk about it, in the industry has more to do with what is desirable for a broader public and how accessible is the music. So if you're playing, if you're playing Mozart, or if you're playing Xenakis, or some composer that people haven't heard of, or the music is really challenging orally, how much do people bring to it? How much can you expect them to bring to it? And where do you push people into hearing some new things without turning them away? And sort of it's like going to a restaurant. If all you've eaten is hamburgers and pizza for most of your life, and all of a sudden you're thrown into even if it's it doesn't have to be super fancy.
Sushi tasting menu.
Sushi tasting menu. Right. Omakase, and then you're going to have what are these? Oh, these are the eggs of fish, and these are raw. Yes, these are raw, and you're going to eat those. Yes, and here's some octopus. Then it can be a frightening thing, even if it's delicious, and if you come to love it, if you try it. So a lot of what we have to think about, I'm jumping around here a little bit though in programming, is how the audience, we're meeting your audience where they are, and also bringing them along and giving them opportunities to open their horizons to different things.
Awesome. So that, I'm guessing that is what you're alluding to, is that is a mission of the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival a little bit, is to bring in new, I'm sure to even grow the company, to bring in new audiences and expose them to kind of deeper and deeper levels of this really amazing music.
Yeah, I think that this music, and the thing that brings me back to it and that I love about it so much, is it is something that you can often just listen to, and on the surface it sounds pretty, or it's nice, or there's something about it that's intriguing. And then, just like anything really, the more you learn about it, the deeper you go, the more rewarding it is. And it's not that it's not rewarding when it's your first time, but if you get to know these pieces, get to know the history, then everything has more meaning, and you can develop a sensibility that then when you're hearing a new work or contemporary work, you start to see where they come from. And so you're learning not only about the history, you're training your ear to understand architecture in music, or to understand the way that melodies have progressed over time, or the way harmonies progressed over time. And then you can retrofit it with a new work, and you can then come to understand it in context. I often think about it like when you go to an art museum and you're looking at art from the 1700s or even earlier. You have these beautiful paintings, or you have these religious paintings, masterworks, right? And Leonardo da Vinci, et cetera. And then as you move forward in time, you can start to see how, they're taking this old trope and they're turning it into something new, or they're taking these brush strokes and now they're doing something different with it. And so when you get to Impressionism, or now you're seeing they're using small bits of paint to represent something, and then as it gets to more modernistic, it's still looking at art through with an eye in the rearview mirror. So there's always something that it's coming from. And there's always something that it's trying to either move away from, or to refract, or to go towards. And I think about that in programming all the time, and how we put pieces together, and how we are going to program a concert and then a whole festival, because you have to break it down so that at every level it's understandable, right?
Very cool. So you're going from California roll to that $100 piece of Toro that right. Somebody's investing in. Right. All right. I think that's an awesome primer. Obviously, you have a great passion for chamber music, and there's so much depth there that anyone who starts getting into it is going to have a lot of exploring to do, and that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm guessing that the founders of the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival had that similar passion. Can you tell us a little bit about the history? How did this festival kick off? Was it always, I know you're doing a year full of programming, was it always a whole year, or was it more confined to a singular event?
So it's an interesting story. The founding artistic director, Maria Martin, is a fantastic flutist, and she started this festival it'll be our 41st summer this year. She was in her 20s, and she had won all these big awards, and she was playing all over the world and was going to these festivals in the summer. And she'd recently gotten married, and her husband missed her and said, look, you're always running off to all these other places. Why don't you start a festival here? And they had a place out in the Hamptons, and they'd been there for a few years. And so they just decided, why not? And so the first festival was 1984. It was 2 concerts over a weekend, and they brought in 4 really wonderful artists that they knew and had worked with regularly, and that's where it started. And then over time, it continued to grow and grow and grow. I came on board in 2014. At that point, they were doing 4 weeks of programming in the summer, and since then, we've added another sort of half week in the summertime, and we have also added a spring series of 3 concerts and a fall series of 3 concerts, and so it's really grown over the course of those 41 years.
Okay, so you've grown a lot over the years. I imagine this isn't now being held in her home anymore. Can you tell me about your venues and kind of how that progressed from her house to now you're hosting hundreds, thousands, over the weekends of your festival? How's that grown?
Yeah, so the first year they actually were performing in the Bridgehampton Presbyterian Church, which is a beautiful old Presbyterian church. It was built in 1880 something, and it seats about 300 people. And they were selling the tickets off of their front porch because when they first started, the church didn't want to allow any commerce to be taking place on the property. So they had to sell the tickets elsewhere. And she tells a story about how she was nursing her youngest child and selling tickets at the same time off of her porch.
Truly mom and pop.
Yeah, truly mom and pop. So over time, that is still our home base. That's where we have the majority of our concerts.
Beautiful.
But we also have been doing a partnership with the Parish Art Museum, which is a beautiful venue out in the Hamptons and Watermill. We also have partnered with a bunch of different other organizations as well. We do a concert every year at the Channing Sculpture Garden, which is adjacent to the Channing Daughters Winery, a really wonderful space out there. I'm not being paid by them, but their wine is actually quite good. Not that you think of Long Island when you think of wine, but it does have some nice wines. And that usually draws 400 or 500 people to that program. We set up a tent and it's all amplified, but it's done very tastefully. And that's a concert where we often will bring in different type of artists as well. For example, this summer we have Stefan Rembel, who is a gypsy jazz guitarist, who will join us, and it'll be a mixed program of Bach and Django Reinhardt style guitar playing. And it's great. He's great. He brings a band. We've worked with him in the past. So anyway, that's the different venues that we use. We also do an annual benefit each year, and that takes place at a golf club, but
with a performance as well, I imagine.
Yeah, with a performance as well. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
So the other side, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is the draw of musicians, and I'm guessing composers too. Are there still composers creating works for chamber, and are you premiering those? Are you fostering new music? As you mentioned, kind of some more modern music is pushing these boundaries. Are you kind of fostering those artists and kind of being a proponent of your own programming in that way?
Absolutely. Maria Martin has a really strong history in commissioning new composers, both on her own and through the festival. I think over the course of the festival and in her own commissions, she's done well over 30, I think, at this point. And we currently have 5 commissions in the works. And these are from composers that are just emerging, as well as composers who are really well established. We've had composers that we've commissioned who've gone on to win Pulitzer Prizes, composers who've already won Pulitzer Prizes, and then we've commissioned works from. And it's something that we really believe in, because this isn't, for me, it's a living art form. This isn't a museum.
Right.
and I guess you could say museums are also living art forms when they bring in new works, but for,
an evolving art form.
An evolving art form, yeah. And we think it's important. You're supporting the creation of new work. It keeps things vital. We've had commissions that are very personal, that have been inspired by other people or activities that have taken place in people's lives, and it's incredible, and then we bring the composer usually to the premiere. They'll come and work with the musicians as well in part of the rehearsal process. And it's great for audiences to see that people are writing music, and it's not just a bunch of dead white Europeans from 200
Very
years.
cool. Bringing diversity to it, and yeah, exactly. Not feeling. I think you get the feeling sometimes at a museum, even though it might not be the case. That this, and I saw recently we have a Cranbrook Art Museum. I think you grew up in Michigan too.
Yeah.
There was all these pieces from recent African American artists from the city of Detroit. That was this whole gallery of artists that I wasn't familiar with, and really brought it home to me that great makers and artists are being made today. And I think that's really cool to give your audience exposure to that. They may have been drawn at first to chamber music through the greats, through these dead white Europeans who made some amazing music and compositions themselves. But now you're growing the field. Let's talk about you're in your 41st year, you said, this year. So what are the plans? What are the plans for the summer? I'm seeing a tiny bit of sun here in Michigan, and it might just have got above 50 degrees. So I'm happy about that. But I'm sure you're always thinking about a sunny day in Bridgehampton, and your day is probably the glass of wine in your hand after the concert. But the programming that goes on during the weekends, what weekends are you going to be putting on the festival this year, or weeks, and what's some programming?
The festival will run from July 12th, it's the first concert, through August 11th. And over the course of that time period, we'll do 12 concerts, and they happen throughout the weekend on the weekends as well. So we're doing Thursdays, Sundays, we have a couple Saturdays, a Monday, a Friday. So it's mixed up within that. But the way that we put our program together is a little bit different from a lot of other places where everything that we do is bespoke. So what that means is that we hire individual artists to come in, do the rehearsal in our spaces, and do the performances in our spaces, instead of, say, hiring a particular string quartet to come in and bring a program. And what that does for us is that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of what we program, because we basically decide what we want to do and then hire people to do it. And so this, every year since I came on board, pretty much every year we've created themes for our summers, and they could be very loose themes. We had a theme about water. We've had themes about, one of the ones we did recently was, we called it Destination America. And it was about composers who had come to America, had lived here, and had either been influenced by what they heard and responded in the way they composed, people like Dvorak, for example, or composers who moved here and really brought their history to America and then infused that in the music that they wrote while they were here. And so that was an example. This year, we're talking about transformations. And in this case, it's about works that started in one way and then maybe were adapted and shifted in another way, or were influenced by something and then transformed over time. And so that's the basic theme. But these themes we try not to let the tail wag the dog.
Certainly.
These themes sort of find their ways throughout the programming, but it's not dogmatic, But this summer we're doing a program that's all Bach concerti. And so Bach was influenced by Vivaldi, and he would sometimes take Vivaldi concerti and then reorchestrate them and rewrite them and then put them out as his own.
A lot like a hip hop remix today.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, I mean, he would
remixing.
Exactly, featuring. Featuring Vivaldi. He he would give the attribution. It wasn't like he was stealing it and saying it was
interpretations his.
Yeah. But it is interesting to me that that's been going on forever. Like other artists influencing other artists, and that's I think just the nature of curiosity and the nature of creation. And so it's been really interesting to put this summer together. We're still actually working on the programming. I have a programming session on Friday with the artistic director where we're going to continue to hammer it out. But we'll be ending the season with two big octets, string octets, one by Mendelssohn, which is a really well-known piece that he wrote when he was, I think, 16 years old. And it's one of the most fantastic, wonderful, creative, challenging pieces in the repertoire. And that's coupled with another string octet by a composer named Ionescu, who a lot of people don't know. But he was also a child prodigy, and this was also written when he was very young. And it has this incredibly complex and beautiful writing that you also know that he must have known Mendelssohn's writing to be able to write this piece. Just because the orchestration is so unique, it's not something that you hear that much of, and he would have been aware of it. And so we think like putting these two pieces side by side is a really interesting combination. And then we have a couple of new works that we're doing as well, and one of them is by a pianist who appears with us. His name is Michael Stephen Brown, and he's writing a new piece that is based on Tennyson's The Lotus Eaters. And originally it was going to have narration, but now it's not. So it'll be influenced by it, but it won't be so easily heard because now the narration is gone, but the piece is still going to carry that memory of the influence.
Excellent. So it just sounds like a really beautiful summer in a way to really, thought-provoking music, music that you can sink your teeth into, and you almost want to do some reading before you go to get up to speed or to understand the concept. Although going in, blank is probably a really nice way to be influenced too. But to that point, and we talked about accessibility earlier. How are you drawing audiences in? How do you advertise or market or give samples to people in order to help grow your audience and expand it to a diverser market?
Marketing is always a challenge. We've done very well. Our audience, thankfully, has had a steady growth pattern. Apart from pandemic when things went sideways, and coming back, we're still coming back. Audiences are coming back. We had our best fall ever this past fall. This spring is shaping up really nicely, so I'm looking forward to having the audiences return. So one is bringing audiences back, and then two is reaching out to new people. So we use a lot of different tools. A lot of it's traditional advertising. Our audience tends to be, as with most classical music audiences, younger or older, not younger. And so we're using radio, ad buys in the newspapers. There's some magazines that we work in. We also do a lot of social media. And so I always try to hire somebody who has a background in social media for our summer festival crew. And I give them a lot of open, free rein to run with it and see what we can do. Because it's always a challenge to bring in younger audiences to this art form, which is an older art form. One of the things that we're doing this summer is a special concert that's going to happen at this little conservancy. It'll only seat about 50 people, but we really want to target a younger audience. So what we're thinking about doing is not even advertising it in our promotional materials, regular promotional materials. We send out about, 7,000 brochures every summer, and we, in the ads in the papers, but that we might do this completely online to try and see if we can pull in a younger audience. There's going to be wine and some food, and 45-minute program with a string quartet that's coming in to join the other musicians for that final concert to create the string octet. And so that's we always want to experiment. That's the other thing that we're trying to do. It's
a cool challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, obviously it's tough, but it seems like, if you can get their ear and they peek around that door, you can grab them. The music will grab them. It'll do its job. Yeah. Once you get the bait 'em and,
Right. If you build it, they will come sort of model or the hope. And it's getting people in the door, because I think a lot of people don't understand what it is. Or they just think they have an image in their mind of what it is, which is, it's an old thing, or this music I don't know, so I'm not so sure. And but once they come, we have people that have been coming back. Well, some people that have been coming from the very beginning, which is amazing. But we have people that once they come in, they hear a concert, they get really interested, and they want to come back. They want to hear more. And I think part of it as well is the intimacy, because what you don't get from a recording, and what you can never get from a recording, is the feeling in the room. And what I love about it is these are almost always acoustic instruments, right? So people are blowing into something. They're pulling horsehair across a string to create this sound. And that sound, those sound waves are literally, you can feel the music as it comes out towards you. And there are moments in these concerts where there's such incredible concentration on the part of not just the musicians, but of the people listening. And there's nothing like that. There's just nothing like that anywhere else. And so those moments are just incredible. And I think it's addictive. When people feel that, they want to come back. They want to feel that again. And I think the other thing about this music is the composers are really striving often to say things that can't be said with words, to say things that are beyond our basic ability to, unless you're a great poet, to put something into language, and it touches you in a way that other things just can't. So that for me is the absolute greatest thing.
That's a gorgeous statement. The idea of this kind of empathy or this emotional connection that you can have, seeing music that is maybe original or original to them, and hearing it in the way it's intended is a service that is just awesome and inspiring. And the idea that you're bringing in younger audiences to experience this and keep it going, I think is really admirable. So appreciate the work that you guys are doing and the effort that you're putting into continue pushing the field forward and doing all this awesome fall programming and spring programming, that the idea that, just a weekend of a passion project became this kind of whole organization that keeps you going and keeps audiences coming back is pretty amazing. Just real quick, kind of from about you and your perspective. You came from Lincoln Center, and now you have been with Bridgehampton for
this will be my 11th year. No, it's my 11th year. Yeah,
over a decade with the festival. So how did you get involved?
I'd always been on a classical music path. So I went to school. I studied music. I played the cello. I got a first glimpse of where I kind of wanted to go, because I was playing with professional orchestras and looking around me and seeing a lot of unhappy people. And I thought, well, how can that be? This music is great. I come to these rehearsals, I want to play, and I see sometimes grizzled performers who have been coming to these rehearsals and playing concerts, and they don't want to put in any extra effort. They don't want any extra time. They just want to get the job done and go home. And I thought, I don't want that to be my life. I don't want to, ever feel like making music is a chore. And I don't want to feel like if I don't have that next gig, I'm not going to eat. And so I started thinking, well, how could I improve the lives of people like this? How could I make that better? And I ended up with this organization doing a fellowship called the American Symphony Orchestra League, now called the League of American Orchestras. And I did a fellowship with them where I went around the country working with different orchestras, but also I spent the summer at the Aspen Music Festival. And there I was totally entranced by the festival, by the way they had organized themselves, by the students, by the professionals. And I was managing the Chamber Symphony there. They have a bunch of different orchestras. Anyway, it was a fantastic experience. I came out of that started doing artistic planning with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, did that for a few years, went to work for the League of American Orchestras, running programs for conductors and composers, and then ended up at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. And the through line is really the music itself and what it meant to me in my life, what it meant to other people that in my family and my friends and the musicians that I came in touch with, and also the sort of transformative effect that it could have on people. And so, even though I've been doing all these different things, there is one sort of through line, and it's really around the keeping this music in people's ears, giving people opportunities to witness it and to hear it. And like you were saying, every performance is ephemeral. It's in that moment. It'll never happen again that same way. And I love that about it. And I love at the end of these concerts, as people come out, I always try to stand up at the front to see people coming out listening to what they're saying. And they are so often just transported by what they've heard. And I'll hear over and over again from the people who are coming out, this was how did you do it? This one's the best ever. This concert is even better than anyone I've ever heard before. And it's that experience, So I feel like I'm doing a public good in the end. We're providing something to the public that is uplifting. Sometimes it's tragic because the music is very dark. Sometimes it's very moving and people get emotional. But it's a space where people can go, they can hear something, they can forget about the rest of their lives for a couple of hours. We're all in community together, and it's being created in that moment for that small lucky group of people, and that to me is all the reason in the world to do any of it. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, that is perfect. I think, people that are involved in the idea of creating something in festivals, and events are typically things that happen and disappear. But the effect that it has on people's lives and the memories made, I think the way people are educated through these moments and expand their horizons and definitions of what they call music or what they call classical music or art or food is super important. So I want to say thank you, Michael, for sharing the story today, for sharing the story of the festival, and for doing the work that you do. It's really great, and I hope people get a kick out of this. I know I did. So take care.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much.
That wraps up our interview with Michael Lawerence. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Bridgehampton Chamber Music Festival. I know I did. Michael really is a very savvy and passionate supporter of the arts. It comes through when talking to him. You can tell he's always thinking about where the festival can and should go next, bringing in new audiences, taking the program in new directions. It's really impressive work that I'm sure will continue to grow its reach. Thanks again to Michael, and thank you again to the listeners as well. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your feedback and suggestions for future guests. Your input really helps shape the show. And if you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, thanks for listening to Event Explorer, and happy exploring.